list of things to like.
I
You're gonna
know.
have to extend your trip, dude.
Las Vegas Lotus of Slam. That actually sounds amazing. Thank you, everyone. That sounds
Mm,
great. All right. So, everyone, thank you so much for joining our event Level Up Reps 101 that drive revenue. But before we begin, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our 20K and growing members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners they may not know about. We do this through great live sessions like the one you're about to experience today, through our online robust forum, and in-person events. Those of you who weren't previously admitted should now have access to the community. And if you don't hesitate to drop a team a note on our website, which I'll drop on the chat here.
chat,
Please
chat,
visit
chat.
us. And if you like this content, you will love our 3-day Revenue Excellence Summit happening next month through
So
July 12th
fun.
through the
So
14th.
cool.
Yep, we pulled together 16 events of amazing content and speakers from CEO of Zoom Info, Sales Loft, as well as sales leaders at HubSpot, Julie, Outreach, Atrium, and more. Here's a link to sign up, which I'll also add in the chat. You won't want to miss out this amazing event.
Yeah, I mean, the speakers are insane. I mean, obviously, I'm speaking a couple times. Obviously, no, just kidding. Like I think we have the CEO of Sales Loft, got the CEO of Zoom Info. We have the president and COO of Gong, the CEO of Clary. It's gonna be super duper rad.
Save your spot. All right, so let's jump on housekeeping. I know we're all excited to dive in, but first let's go over some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions for Pete, please use the Q&A function and we'll be sure to get them. Also, please engage in the chat. I love seeing where you're from, but definitely ask Pete some questions throughout the whole event. And yes, this event is being recorded. You'll be able to access the recording and key takeaways on the previous event page.
Hey, Angelica, is this event gonna be recorded and sent out after the fact? Oh,
It's going to be recorded
is it gonna be
and the deck.
recorded? Whoa,
I know
weird.
everyone's going to ask for this amazing deck as well, so don't worry. The key takeaways, the deck, and the recording will all be found on the MSP website, so stay tuned for that. Now to our sponsor. Our founder of MSP and parent company Atrium is sponsoring this event today, so I'm super glad and I'm going to pass it off to Pete to introduce Atrium himself and run the show from here, and I'll be back for the closing remarks.
Cool. Thanks, Angelica. I appreciate it. Yeah. So just really quickly for folks who are not familiar, a lot of folks are familiar, but Atrium makes data-driven sales management software. Pretty straightforward. Atrium exists to help sales managers, so AE, SDR, AM, CSM managers use metrics and data to improve team performance. And the mechanism by which it does that is by providing a world-class harness of metrics and analytics that are continuously monitored statistically, and information is presented to managers in order to help them be aware of issues before they become problems, so they can then intervene, fix problems, like fix those problems, coach to those solutions, and essentially win, right? So spend more time changing rep behavior and winning, as opposed to like diving through dashboards and like trying to like look for needles in a haystack. And one of the coolest things about Atrium is it takes about 3 minutes to set up. You just sign in with your Salesforce CRM, and within a couple of hours, after the data syncs, you have a world-class analytics harness for to play around with. A little bit of intro on me. So as Angelica noted, I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. I also started Modern Sales Pros. I run go-to-market here at Atrium. I've been doing kind of like sales leadership for, golly gee willikers, nearly a little bit more than a decade now at this point. Started at my last software company, TalentBin, where I was the a business generalist founder, but then also our first sales rep, sales manager, sales leader, etc. Ultimately, the company was acquired by Monster Worldwide. Probably our sales organization was around like 20 reps, 20 CSMs, etc. And then I was responsible for new product sales at Monster Worldwide after that. So subsequent to that, wrote a book on sales or startup sales called Founding Sales. And so, like, as you can tell, I think about sales stuff just a little bit. And so we're going to be talking about one-on-ones, which is one of my kind of favorite topics here. Before we get into that, a couple of resources that we're offering the community here. These are some of my favorite sales management books. Cracking the Sales Management Code is all about kind of like data-driven geekery, which is good and important. 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach is more about coaching, right? Like changing rep behavior, and a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today is kind of related to that. And then, of course, The Qualified Sales Leader by John McMahon, the CRO at PTC and one of the creators of Medic, is, yeah, it's just a fantastic book. across it's kind of like a whole, like, it's a grab bag of like really cool sales leadership stuff. So if you want to get these books, and then also if you'd be interested in a Coffees for Closers Yeti mug, I think we're going to be dropping a hyperlink here in the chat for folks to sign up for that in exchange for a quick meeting with our team. Cool. So one of the things we believe here at Atrium, and I think is related to the topic at hand, is that managers are extremely important in driving high performance of sales teams. And they're the first line of kind of like execution there for those teams. And so the like good management and managers who have their act together drive all sorts of wonderful benefits, like higher rep productivity. More of your reps end up being top performers. This is something we talk about in our data-driven coaching masterclass, but essentially you can pull up the people who are kind of like in the middle and make them top performers through better management, right? Rather than just having 2 or 3 top performers who just like naturally get it. You can do the management work to pull other people into high performance. And there's a bunch of other great kind of benefits as well. And so when you think about the things that managers ought to be doing in order to drive that success and drive that better rep performance, it ends up being a handful of different things that should be woven through an operating rhythm. Obviously, deal inspection and deal strategy. I mean, think most account executive, or like most AE managers, don't really need help or reminding to focus on this. In fact, they probably focus on it a little too much because that's kind of like where they come from. But there's actually a bunch of other things as well. Like you have to track goals. We're going to be specifically talking about the importance of data-driven one-on-ones here. You have to pay attention to monitoring ramp, like in the successful ramp of new account executives. We have another master class that I do on that around data-driven ramp monitoring. Maybe we can drop that link in the chat in case people are interested. And then for the people who are already ramped, well, then you got to like identify issues and like dive into fixing them. And then on the flip side, be able to take what your top performers are doing, identify what that secret sauce is, and then spread that across all the rest of the team. Right, so these are all the different things that you ought to be doing. And so one of the things that ends up being extremely powerful for helping with these things, right? So helping with issue identification, helping with standardizing the success of top performers, doing a good job of monitoring the ramp of those reps is in those one-on-ones, right? So like the one-on-one is like the space, right? The space wherein that like the work of management takes place. We're going to talk about kind of do's and don'ts here. Don't believe me, believe my buddy Richard Harris here, who's absolutely fantastic. He's a wonderful sales trainer. In fact, actually, one of the things that we do for our customers is because Atrium's really focused on like the data-driven management component side of things, right? Like helping managers with the metrics piece. What we have is we have Richard do a management boot camp once a month that kind of helps with like the soft side of things, like having performance conversations, well-structured one-on-ones, promotion planning, all those sort of things, interviewing, et cetera, et cetera. So we actually have one coming up, I think, in a few weeks. So we're going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat here if you want to sign up for that. Normally something like this would cost you like $1,000 if you were going to attend one of Richard's boot camps. In this case, it's on us, it's on Atrium, it's on Uncle Pete. And all we ask for in exchange for when you sign up there is that you'll just be taking a quick meeting with our team to talk about data-driven sales management in exchange for attending that half-day workshop. So cool. So why would you do one-on-ones, right? Well, there's a number of different reasons, but it really is the place where like management happens, right? It's the plate, like it's the space on the calendar where like the behaviors of management are taking place, and so those would be things like building a relationship and building solidifying relationship. That's where you're coaching your reps, where you're providing feedback. It's where you're getting ahead of big issues. It's where you're holding people accountable, and so it's important to hold people like there needs to be a place where accountability is held, because then reps are thinking about that like the rest of the week, the rest of the month. Like, hey, I have my one-on-one coming up. I know we're going to be talking about this thing that like I'm being held accountable to, whether it's my bookings goal or my op creation goal or what have you, etc. And so the kind of a way that I like to structure one-on-ones here is to make sure that they're weekly or bi-weekly. um, Making sure that that they do happen, right? Like things happen, so sometimes you have to like move things around, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to skip them, right? Because when you start skipping them, instead of like moving them, like moving them on the calendar, but instead you just like cancel them, that's when like bad things start showing up. So we have a meeting template here that folks can use if they want to. I think we'll drop the I think we're going to go ahead and drop that link into the chat here. But having a document that can be useful, that can allow you to come back to like, hey, this is the thing we talked about last time. Cool. Where did we get to, etc. On a recurring basis can be really powerful. Now, the other thing though is that the reason why using data in your one-on-one as opposed to just like, hey, like how you feeling, etc. So using data ends up actually being very, very powerful and important there for a variety of reasons. So why that is the case is because essentially data and metrics gives you leverage, right? It gives you leverage and it gives you accuracy, right? Or as I like to say, get out of anecdata and anecdotes. Oh, I feel this way, like as opposed to like, cool, I'm seeing this actual thing in the world. And so there's a couple of different reasons why that's the case. So it turns out that like riding along on calls ends up being fairly low leverage. Now, that's not to say the manager shouldn't be on calls with reps, but how do you know that you're on the right one where the issue happens that you need to address, right? Um, and so by using data, you can make sure like, oh, okay, this rep right here has these problems right here in these stages right here. I'm going to be on those calls right here. I'm going to do this coaching behavior here. Um, Similarly, a lot of organizations now have remote staff, a distributed or hybrid sales organization. And so not being able to, I'm sitting on a sales floor right now and it's super loud. So I know that like things are happening, right? Um, Now, when you have a distributed sales organization, unfortunately, you can't just like take your headset off and listen to the sales floor, right? So doing remote instrumentation or kind of like remote staff kills that ability to do what I like to call organic instrumentation. Similar and kind of related to riding along on calls, also listening to calls can be very low leverage. Now, listening to all the calls is very low leverage as opposed to listening to the ones that matter for a given rep, at a given stage or what have you. But instead, just kind of like going through all of them, hoping to find something versus using data to hone in on the spot where you want to address. And then, of course, really importantly is like being super deal centric is highly problematic as well. So first of all, if you're closing deals for your reps as opposed to using data to manage the rep and coach the rep in order to give them like help them and up level them, well, now you're just like a super rep, and that's extremely low leverage. And then similarly, if you're doing like if the only way that you're doing instrumentation is through recurring deal inspection, like kind of what you're doing there is you have to intuit what the issue is with a given rep by like looking at deals on a recurring basis, saying, oh, you know what, this rep has these deals keep disappearing at this stage right here. This is conversion rate. Or, oh man, these deals keep closed losing. Or when I ask about this rep hasn't been on top of it. Maybe he's got a pipeline hygiene problem or a pipeline management problem. Well, like you're trying to intuit that by kind of like looking at individual deals versus you could use data to say, hey, this rep has a ton of untouched opportunities as compared to his peers. That tells me he's got a pipeline management problem, right? Versus having to like derive that from like using inductive reasoning to like to level that up. Instead, it's like literally right there, like, hey, this rep has an untouched ops problem. This rep right here has an activity problem. This rep right here has a conversion rate problem out of these stages. So this is why data ends up being really impactful, because it can zoom you in on the thing that ends up actually really being important. Cool. So how can we do that, right? So if you believe that using data ends up being an important thing in your one-on-ones, like, well, how do we actually do that? And I think one of the things that I like to talk about, this is another one of my favorite books. It's called Boyd. It's by this guy, or it's about this guy named John Boyd, who innovated the OODA Loop. So observe, orient, decide, and act. Started out actually in modern air combat, so dogfighting. But the whole idea here is that essentially what we're doing from a managerial standpoint is we're constantly observing what is the state in the world, right? Like making sense of it. So orienting, saying, hey, you know what? This is the problem that I'm seeing here. Like this is the next best action. I'm going to decide on what that next best action is. Then I'm going to act on it to fix it. And then I'm going to loop back again. I'm going to loop back again up here, and I'm going to observe the state in the world again. In this case, it was like there's two jet fighters, and they're like trying to like shoot each other down, and like one person sees the other person's in a certain situation. They make a change. Did it work? Right? Are they now in a position to like to attack the other plane? Oh, they are. Great. I'm going to shoot now. Or oh, they're not. The other person reacted. Now I have to react again. So this actually applies to management in a very meaningful fashion, because what we want to be able to do is do that same loop with our reps. And so the problem with this is that if you have a situation where you don't have data, right, it's more kind of you're kind of like blind. And so the behaviors there, and I feel that like a lot of people will probably identify with this, where instead of observing and detecting, you're like, oh man, I didn't see that until like they had a bookings miss, or I didn't see that until the end of the quarter or the end of the month where they had an opportunity creation shortfall for SDRs. Instead of being able to inspect specifically using data, well, all you can kind of do is like ask questions like, hey, how are you feeling about this? The other thing that ends up being really problematic is, how do you know if you're right? And this ends up being, like managers are humans. And so if you feel like if you're not sure that the issue is this, like an untouched ops problem and a pipeline management problem as an example, well, you might like hold your tongue, right? Like you don't want to come off the top rope and say, hey, you got this problem right here. Because like, what if you're wrong? Nobody wants to be the asshole. And so what ends up happening is all of this ends up making it such that people don't take action. And so instead, what we would prefer is with data, what we can do is we can say, hey, I see a thing over here. Like, I'm not making this up. I see this issue right here. I see that this rep has too many untouched ops. I see that this SDR right here is engaging not multi-threading enough, like engaging too few contacts per account. Right? I see it in the data right here, visualized. Okay, why is that? Right? Like, I'm going to dig into the next thing and say, hey, why does this person have too many untouched ops? Is it because they're overloaded and they have too many ops compared to everybody else? Okay, let's go look at that. How many ops they have? Oh, I actually don't have more ops than everybody else. Well, that would indicate to me that like maybe they're just like not doing enough work. They're not like engaging in the requisite activity. Great. Let's go look at how many ops they're touching in a given week, and like how many emails they're sending, how many meetings they're having. Oh shoot, they seem like they have a low activity problem. Right. So by looking into the data and kind of like asking those next questions very quickly, we can say, hey, I saw something weird. I have a hypothesis of what the root cause is here. Great. That's what I can do. Let's go ahead and prescribe a solution to that. Oh, I see that you have this untouched op problem right here. It really looks like this is the result of not having enough time on the calendar in order to touch your ops. Let's go ahead and book 2 stripes on your calendar for 2 hours each, maybe on Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon, that is literally for pipeline management and for pipeline touches there. So that's prescribing an action, right? Like we identify the issue and then we prescribe the action. And then what we would do, of course, is once we prescribe that, we would then loop back again. All right, loop back in. Cool. In 2 weeks, when we have our next one-on-one, we're going to go ahead and look and see what your untouched ops situation is. All right, we're going to see if we fixed it. And if we fixed it, we'll move on to the next biggest problem that we have. And if we haven't fixed it, that's why we loop back again. We didn't declare victory. You can say, hey, let's go ahead and like we need to really buckle down here and fix this. Right. And so that's how the OODA loop works in sales management, and specifically as relates to using data. Um, and so just a quick commercial for Atrium here. This is literally what Atrium does. Atrium helps managers use data in order to do what I was just describing. What that looks like in practice is Atrium has, you know, every single KPI that an SDR, AE, AM, CSM manager could possibly want in order to manage their team. But not just, it's not just that those metrics exist, they're also being continuously monitored for potential issues. So what that looks like is proactive goal tracking. You can set goals on any of those KPIs on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, and the software will just automatically track progress towards an achievement or non-achievement of it. The software will also monitor all of those KPIs in order to alert you to an issue like, hey, this rep right here has way more untouched ops than all the other 10 mid-market reps, or this SDR right here has their email response rate is deteriorating as compared to their historical performance on email response rates. So essentially monitoring these KPIs rather than us having to use our eyeballs to do it, statistically doing it and monitoring that in order to help us understand and say, hey, Pete, I see this issue over here with this rep right here. Hey, Pete, I see this issue right here with this rep over here. Hey, Pete, I see this rep is kicking ass right here, and here's specifically the reason why. And then the last thing Atrium does is it actually does that root cause analysis. Right, so it'll dive into what the root cause of either a problem or outperformance will look like there. And so one of the cool, and like in short, what Atrium does is it helps sales managers use data to manage their team, to manage by metric and be a modern sales leader. And so we're blessed to work with, actually this should be closer to 250 customers right now. We're blessed to work with hundreds of customers who use the software to do literally that. So that's just like a little bit of background on Atrium. Now we can kind of get into how this would be systematized in process. So cool. So how do you so importantly, like, okay, we know that we should be doing one-on-ones here. We know that we should be, coaching with data. How do you systematize it to make sure that it happens, right? Rather than it just being kind of like throwing darts. And so what we're going to talk about is how you can systematize this. So the first thing is that you need to have the assets already available. And so what that means is like having the metrical assets available, not so like you can have to like, oh, maybe I need to make a report to answer this question, versus just having that asset already available, like in a dashboard or in a set of reports that are pre-baked, that then you loop back across every time you do that one-on-one. So these are a couple different ways you can do this. Most CRMs have reporting packages in place. The good news is it's already available. The downside is that it ends up usually being pretty fussy, hard to use. Oftentimes you have to ask sales operations to help you out in that regard. And then of course, like, it doesn't monitor itself. Business intelligence is kind of just like a bigger version of this, like whether you're talking about Tableau or Looker or what have you. But again, even harder to use for normal human beings, and certainly don't do any of the monitoring for you. And then of course there's what we like to call data-driven sales management software, which is like Atrium. The benefits of these are they're extremely quick to set up, right? It's automatically monitored, etc. And the downside associated with them is it's not quite as flexible as traditional business intelligence, but you can get pretty far with it. And importantly, it does that continuous monitoring for you on a recurring basis. So that's the first thing, is like, hey, we got to have the assets in hand. And the next thing is like, great, well, then we want to systematize observation. And so the mechanism by which we're going to do that is by making sure that we have space on the calendar to ensure that we're we're consuming that data. And so these are the different ways. Like this is just like an example operating rhythm right here. We have a pipeline review, you've got deal strategy meetings, you've got one-on-ones, which of course is what we're talking about. The QBR ends up being on a quarterly basis, and maybe you do call reviews like on a monthly basis or something like that. But importantly, you have to make sure that there's space on the calendar in order to make sure that these things happen, right? So one of the things we joke about here at Atrium is calendar is destiny, right? So if you don't have the space on the calendar and it's not recurring, you're probably not going to do the thing, right? So if you want to make sure that the thing happens, like a one-on-one that is not a deal review, where you're reviewing those metrics and focusing on coaching initiatives, well, what we would want to do there is make sure that that's calendared and we have the relevant assets there. Cool. So then the next thing would be is like, okay, great. Well, like, how do we get good at systematizing the orientation and decisioning part of the OODA loop? Because then what we want to be able to do there is like, as we're approaching that one-on-one, detect any potential issues, diagnose what the potential root causes are, and then communicate that appropriately. And so I do a much more expansive master class on data-driven coaching that kind of gets into this more substantially, but just kind of like the TLDR here is what you kind of want to look for is like like looking for issues and looking for bright spots, both with respect to totals and with respect to trends, right? So this is an example right here of customer facing meetings on the calendar for a given month. And what you can see here is like, you've got one rep who's outperforming and you got this other rep right here who's, off pretty substantially. And so this is pretty easy for us to be like, cool, these humans are not different. They're all mid-market AEs, or they're all enterprise AEs, or they're all like, outbound sales development reps or whatever. Why are these people so high and this person so low? This person right here, we need to dive like in our one-on-one, we need to say, hey, I saw this thing. Let's talk about it. This person right here, again, in our one-on-one, we say, wow, you're really like hitting the cover off the ball right here. What is the secret to your success there, such that we can spread that around to everybody else? So those are totals. And then the same is true with respect to trends, right? So like, hey, is there any changes recently? So in this case, what we can see is there's a number of reps. This is, again, customer-facing meetings, pretty basic KPI. We can see, hey, these reps right here, they are consistently low. They're consistently low on a week by week basis. Let's talk about that in our one-on-one, because it's not just that they're low one-off, they're low, persistently. This rep right here seems like he's having a deterioration in behavior. He was higher and now he is declining. Okay, let's talk, like, different conversation, an important conversation to have, but a different one. And then similarly, hey, here's these outperformers. What, like, and not only, it's not just like a fluky thing, it's on a consistent basis, this person is outperforming. And so again, there's a more advanced masterclass on data-driven coaching and how to like interpret metrics more meaningfully, but this is kind of like the quick and dirty on that. One thing that can be very powerful is having those statistics done for you, essentially having that analysis done for you. These are some examples from Atrium of statistical analysis on those KPIs, where instead of having to use your eyeball saying, hey, like, I see that this person is high or what have you, instead what we can see is that this person, right, the software is actually like doing it for us here, right? Like actually saying, hey, this person has 40% fewer new opportunities coming into their pipe than their peers. This person has 75% more opportunities than they normally have at this point in time, right? So doing the statistics for us. So then the last thing we're going to kind of touch on here around like doing like orienting and deciding is on how to do root cause analysis. And so what that kind of looks like here is we actually have we call this a metrics driver tree here, where you have these relationships between all the different metrics and kind of like how you can understand which metrics drive other ones. We actually make laminates of these. Actually, here, they're right here on my desk. You can see. We make laminates of this. I think we may have a landing page where people can sign up to get those, to get a set of those laminates, because they end up being like a very helpful thing to just have on your desk. But suffice it to say that it helps you understand the relationships between different parts of the sales motion. And so when you're looking for a root cause, what you want to do is go right. Right, you want to go right. So if, as an example, if an account executive has a bookings issue here, Where might that be coming from? Well, it could be come from a variety of places. It could be that he has too many wins. Actually, not too many wins, too few wins. Or it could be that he's actually fine with respect to wins. He actually has too low of an average sales price right here. Or his deal cycle is elongating. And so then what you would say is, oh, okay, actually, it turns out that it says wins. Okay, well, where do wins come from? Well, wins come from win rate crossed with attempts, right? Like how many at bats they're getting. So in this case, if they have plenty of at bats, well, maybe it's a win rate problem. If it's a win rate problem, well, now we know that we have to coach that. Where would that win rate problem be coming from, perhaps? Well, unfortunately, win rate comes from a lot of places. Like this is the hard work of selling. But what that might be is that might be things like, hey, look, this rep, kind of in our example previously, has so many untouched ops um, that like the reason why his win rate is super problematic is because he's just like too many untouched ops, can't manage his pipe, and like losing track of his ops. Great. If that's the case, now we can fix this problem down here. We can fix his untouched op problem, which would then fix his win rate problem, which would then fix his wins problem, which would then fix his bookings problem. Right. And so that's what I mean about like going right, like going right over here, and getting to like what the actual root cause of a potential problem, like a rep's behavioral problem is. And then you can do the same thing with the SDRs as well, where you can have like, hey, look, where does pipeline come from? Pipeline comes from the pipeline value crossed with how many ops have been accepted. Okay, where does op acceptance come from? Well, op acceptance rate versus op submitted. Great. Where does op submitted come from? Well, that kind of comes from a variety of places. How much, like, what's the quantity of prospecting activity that's going on, and what's the quality of prospecting activity? So, as an example, again, maybe if an SDR isn't generating enough pipe, where's that coming from? Oh, it's coming because like they're submitting too few opportunities. Okay, where's that coming from? Well, this is basic. This SDR is just engaging way fewer accounts than everybody else. Oh, okay. Like, let's fix that. Hey, you need to do more work. Like you need more prospecting blocks on your time. Or, oh, okay, well, where's this coming from? Your account engagement numbers are low compared to everybody else. Oh, but like, I'm touching all my accounts. Oh man, you're right. We didn't assign you enough accounts. Great, let's fix that. Right. Or conversely, maybe it's a quality of prospecting activities, situation where, say, instead that the quantity is fine, but maybe the behavior is like not as performant. So that might be, oh, like you've got too low of an email response rate. What's going on here? Like that's a problem. You can do all the activity in the world, but if your email responsiveness rate is dramatically lower than your peers, well, then that would indicate there's like maybe something wrong with your messaging. Maybe there's something wrong with your contact selection, etc. So again, going right, boop, 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 going right will help us address that. Cool. And then of course, then what we have to do is we have to loop back. And so this is kind of the purpose of having a working document that you have, is that you can loop back and say, hey, we decided that we were gonna, like, we made ourselves a deal, right? We made a pinky promise between manager and rep that you were going to work on your untouched ops by blocking those 2 hours on those 2 days in order to do pipeline management. We created a report in Salesforce, in the CRM, for you to go through, your open ops and make sure that there was a touch on all of them recently and a meeting in the future. And then we're going to loop back again and we're going to say, hey, did that actually happen? Right? And this is where accountability shows up. Right? Did you actually do this? Is this happening? Right? But if you don't have that place meeting on the calendar, you don't have that documentation, it ends up being very difficult to systematize that looping back and drive that accountability. Cool. So let's talk about coaching. So one of the things that can be done in that OODA loop is coaching and developing. So changing rep behavior and up-leveling their skills. And of course, the way that you do that is you have to identify the issue at hand. Like the example we used earlier was the untouched ops situation and pipeline management, but it might be different. Of course it's going to be different on a rep by rep basis. And so the place where that happens is in the one-on-one, where we maybe we do some role playing. We literally sit together and like do email sending together, or like do whatever the behavior is that needs to be addressed there. And so what we can kind of, some examples here of what I consider coaching versus not would be things that are focused on showing up with evidence and then providing like a recommendation, or kind of like an eliciting a potential next action. So for instance, what would not be coaching would be something like, hey, when's the Lockheed deal coming in? Versus, hey, what's concerning you about the Lockheed deal? Or maybe even a more data-driven version of that would be, hey, I noticed that it seems like we don't have a meeting on the calendar in the future with anyone from Lockheed, right? What's concerning you about that? Another example of this could be like, hey, can you make this forecast bigger? Okay, like, what do you want me to do? Just like inflate op sizes, just like make shit up, pull in deals that like aren't actually going to come in and actually happen. So like, essentially you want me to like put bad data into the forecast just to to fluff things up, versus, hey, I've noticed that your forecast is pacing behind. Are there things that we can pull forward? But maybe there's not. Like maybe we're hosed, right? Maybe there aren't things that we can pull forward with discounting or what have you. So instead, the more important thing there would be to avoid that situation in the future, right? So these are ways that, like, what we can talk. These are things to kind of think about as relates to coaching. One of my kind of favorite books on sales coaching is again by Hillman Story and Corey Bray. It's called 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach. They have this coaching framework that they call Coach: challenge, outline, action plan, consequences, hold accountable. I love this book because it's written as a parable, right? It's like a story, so it's like super page turner, very fun, but has extremely powerful pieces of this coaching framework outlined in that parable. Um, and it ties extremely well with one-on-ones there. And I think we're gonna go ahead and drop a link to that to sign up for this in the chat here. Wonderful. And then let me just write something down here. Sorry, guys. Cool. So let's talk about like what an example of this looks like in practice. And so in short, this is an example of like identifying where a rep had an issue, and then what we're going to do is we're going to dig into that and then coach the rep to success there. So this is an example where a rep here in orange had lighter conversion rates as compared to his peers. And so this right here is a KPI card. This is actually pulled from Atrium, but you could do this with other examples as well. Like you do this in your CRM if you're good enough to build the relevant reporting. But this is conversion rate on a stage by stage basis. So these are different stages down here. This is the conversion rate on the side over here, and then on each of these points is where what proportion of the opportunities that are in that stage made it to the next stage there. And so what you can see really quickly is like the rep is in orange and the team average is here in blue. And you can see that this rep actually had a pretty substantial problem, getting meetings to hold, because their conversion rate at a meeting pending was lower than others. But more importantly, a really big delta between their conversion rate at a proposal versus their conversion rate at a proposal for the rest of the team. And then again, the same thing for contract out. So like you would look at this and you would say, hey, this rep looks like they have a closing problem, right? Things get to the bottom of the funnel and then they don't progress. They don't progress from there, and then that's concerning. And so what ended up happening here was usually where closing problems show up is in discovery, right? And making sure that that folks are getting stuff out of discovery and making sure that folks are doing a good job on discovery there. And so this is a different KPI where we worked on improving their discovery skills. And what you can see is this is a different KPI looking at the conversion rate over time. So it's just that conversion rate out of discovery as opposed to the conversion rate of every single stage here. What you can see is that rep was low on discovery right here and then popped up here after that coaching, right? Around like focusing in on helping them do a better job of discovery, getting out of discovery. Same with respect to getting things out of pilot, right? What you can see here is that this is when the rep did focus in on doing a better job with the discovery and managing those pilots better. You went from having, this is a KPI card that we called stage reach, where it's like how many ops got to a given stage. In this case, the stage is pilot, right? So you can see that the rep and the other reps were kind of bouncing around down here. And then once they focused in on doing a better job with respect to discovery and getting people into pilots, you can see this jump on a monthly basis of opportunities that get to that stage, that pilot stage, right? And then similarly, with respect to kind of like closing at the bottom of the pipe, one of the things you can see here is this is a different KPI focused on win rate from that proposal stage, right? From that proposal. And so the coaching focused in on, again, doing a better job with respect to discovery, which then puts you in a better situation when you get down funnel. And you can see the change in win rate from proposal, where it had been around like 50 or 60%, then it jumps way up here to like 80% plus. So what all this is to say that by identifying where those issues were for the rep, focusing in on coaching to those problems, then changing their behavior, the result was, whereas before their conversion rate out of meeting pending and proposal and contract out was lower than the team average, subsequent to all that coaching, it was now much higher, right? So meeting pending, much higher than their peers. Manager reviews, proposals, much higher than their peers. And so that's where data-driven kind of coaching can really impact changing rep behavior for the better there. And what kind of comes out of that as a result was, because this rep was doing a much better job getting things down funnel, and also keeping them down, like keeping them in the pipe as they went down funnel, lo and behold, you could see the amount of pipeline, rather than them having a leaky bucket because things are leaking out of the bucket down here. Instead, the bottom of the pipeline starts getting more and more and more stacked there. And so this is just like one case study. Like this is a case study about a single rep that had like a single set of improvement areas that were diagnosed and then coached to. And then, as you can see, we loop back again and said, hey, look, this has now been fixed, and here's the positive outcomes that are associated with this. This is the behavior you should be doing with all your reps, right? Like this is just one rep with like one pathology. You should be doing this with all of your reps on a recurring basis, because that's the mechanism by which, go back up here, that's how this happens, right? By making people better from a craft standpoint, right? Hey, say these discovery questions this way. Great, you go now. No, you did it wrong. Do it again. You could do a little bit better like this. Do it again. Like changing those behaviors upskills those reps to make them higher performing, which like doing this across all of your team raises all of your reps, versus being in the deals, like trying to help like specifically with this deal or this deal or this deal, this deal. What you're doing is you're changing the reps behavior and making it such that they are better across all of their all of their deals. Cool. So in summary, that's kind of one-on-one stuff. What you want a productive one-on-one to look like is, again, like all about looping, right? So the rep is receiving targeted coaching, guidance, and performance feedback, right? That ought to be data-driven. Focus on the thing that is like the biggest critical path for them right now. You want to make sure that you're following that agenda and then looping back on it to make sure that you actually, like, the things that had been assigned are being acted on and that progress is being made there. Lastly, again, if you guys want a copy of any of these books and Atrium Coffees for Closers, Yeti mug, go ahead and we're going to drop the link in the chat here, and you can sign up for that in exchange for a quick meeting with our team. So that's pretty much everything that we wanted to address here today. If there are Q&A, we can get into that here. I don't know if there was any Q&A or stuff in the chat here, but
Hey, Pete, there was a question from Jackie. She asked,
oh, I think we lost Angelica. Cool. I'm going to look for Jackie's comment up here. Is there best practice ratio for one-on-ones when it comes to what the manager brings to the table and what the team member brings to the table? Some managers prefer leave the one-on-one totally open, what's top of mind for the team member. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. Right. I think that's usually an indication of like a manager kind of like abdicating responsibility for managing the rep. Like the the purpose of being a manager is to coach, identify, and to identify issues and coach and fix things. And so if you're like leaving that up to the rep, then like I don't think you're not really doing your job. You can have a spot in the meeting that's like for that if the rep wants to do that, but you should be showing up, right? So you can kind of see like rep topics, manager topics, right? What have you. Like the manager should, like, you're the manager. You're not you're not the you are doing the management. And so asking people to show up with their own kind of like topics, like they may show up with the topics that they want to, but instead what managers should be kind of like driving the agenda in that regard. Cool. Dave has a great question here. How many skill deficiencies do you focus on in a single coaching session? Great question. You want to focus on like one, right? It's got to be like one, because it's just like a I don't know if Dave, if you play golf or what have you, but when you're working on your golf swing, really the only thing, like, you want to be working on one thing at a time, right? Versus saying like, oh, okay, like keep your head down, keep your legs straight, keep your arm straight, move your elbow like this. At that point, like you're gonna not like nothing's gonna improve whatsoever. Versus just like, hey, you know what? We're gonna hit 100 balls where you're just gonna keep your head down as much as possible. Or hey, we're going to work, like, you have challenges asking for the business, right? And you have like I've heard you struggle on those on a number of calls. Literally, we're going to sit here for like 30 minutes and you're going to take these 10 closing phrases right here and you're going to repeat them aloud to me 5 times each, times 10, for the next 30 minutes. And like literally we're just going to like groove that into your brain and groove it into your tongue so you have no problem asking these closing questions, right? So focusing in on one kind of like challenge at a time ends up being the most important thing there. And then once you remove that, right, once you fix that, then you get to move on to the next one, right? But you're not going to do it all at once there. Cool. On CRM, large roofing company with legacy internal software. Sorry, but not modern CRM details, very limited data. Good news is they say they're getting into CRM. I'm not sure what Doc's question is here. Wonderful. Great. Cool, guys. Well, unless there's any other questions here, really appreciate everyone taking the time to kind of like hang out here today. And as noted earlier, I think we're going to drop a link to um, for folks to go ahead and sign it. Like if you want a set of these books and that Coffees for Closers mug, we can drop the link in there as well. Similarly, if you're interested in joining that half-day sales management boot camp that's run by Richard Harris, we can go ahead and drop that link in here as well. And for both of those, they're great. They're great promotions. And all we ask in exchange is a quick chat about how your organization is doing data-driven sales management with your right now. Wonderful. Well, Angelica, thank you very much for hosting, and I'll see everybody online. Okay.
Bye, everyone.